Well, hello folks, and welcome to episode 249 of Retropower Uncut. And here we are in the fabrication shop, and we're going to start with a little bit on E-Type, which is progressing on all fronts. We have completed, to a point, exhaust fabrication. That is now all the way to the back, but the next phase is we need customer visits to come and assess in person the tailpipe, because we think there's probably some tweaking to be done on that. There's some decisions to be made on the actual outlet. That's an original E-Type exhaust outlet. It's probably a bit too far back, but we need a customer view on that. There's a lot of toing and froing via messages and via photographs and via videos, but actually I think it just needs seeing in person by the customer to assess whether it's what he wants or what he doesn't want, and what needs changing if it needs changing, because we can waste an awful lot of time communicating distance when actually it needs seeing in person. So that's the next phase on that. Other than that, we're complete on the exhaust. It's been a long slog, been a lot of fabrication, an awful lot of stainless TIG wire burnt, but we are now in receipt of a complete exhaust system. So Scott's moved on to other areas, one of which has been the dashboard assembly. The carbon fibre dash, which you'll have seen in previous episodes, needed some final trimming to fit, which Scott's now done. And got to clear all the things it needs to clear, so we can move on to making the mountings for that. At the moment, he's then parked that to move on to another area, which is the wiper motor. Originally, we were running the wiper motor using a setup that we've used on a previous E-Type, where we use a modern wiper motor, the source of which escapes me. Could have been Ford Transit, but I'm not sure it is, can't remember now. But anyway, a modern new Valio wiper motor, which we've mounted on like an adapter plate onto the original mountings on the bulkhead. However, in cleaning up the engine bay and tidying up all of the other plumbing, tanks and ancillaries and making the bulkhead look super neat and super symmetrical, the wiper motor is asymmetric because it's on one side. And we decided it would actually be rather nice to try and hide that behind the tank assembly, which wasn't possible with the bulkhead the way it was. So Scott's now modified the bulkhead and put a pocket into the bulkhead to recess the wiper motor backwards within the bulkhead, still operate the standard linkage, so we can still operate the wipers via the same method, but using the modern wiper motor, which is a lot smaller than the original, and then recessing it back inside the dash, basically into a pocket in the bulkhead that gets out of the line of sight and actually gets it behind the tank cover assembly, the plastic tank cover assembly that we're going to have in the engine bay. So now that's not visible, and then the engine bay can stay nice and symmetrical, and all will be good on that front. So yeah, that's bulkhead progress, dash progress, exhaust progress, and finally, for his fourth trick of the week, Scott's moved on to what he's working on right now, which is the E-Pass pump. We're using, due to lack of space left now for ancillary drives on the front of the engine, we are going to be running a electric power steering electro-hydraulic pump, basically. So it's electric motor-driven hydraulic pump, same as we're running on the Austin Allegro, same as we've run on many vehicles in the past. So we're running an electric power steering pump, but we need to find room for that. The place where we were originally going to fit it, which was basically where the battery would have lived on a V12 E-Type originally, we now are using for an airbox, which I believe George will elaborate on in a bit. However, there is another bit of space within the front subframe on the offside front of the car where we can hide that pass pump. So that's what Scott's working on now, the bracketry to mount that steering pump within the subframe in that space. It's quite tight. Filling it's going to be a bit awkward, but as I've pointed out to all concerned, you should only really have to fill it, maybe 2 or 3 times in the life of the car, you would hope. If you're filling it up any other time, something's gone wrong, because it's not the sort of fluid that should be coming out anyway. You shouldn't be using it. It's not like fuel. If you're having to top it up, something's amiss. So the fact that you need a funnel with a little extension on it to fill it is a moot point, really, because it's not something we should be filling up. So that's fine. So that's what Scott's working on, and that pretty much encapsulates the work on this side for the E-Type. I will elaborate slightly in that Concept 303, Andy, has done some machining for us, which I think was mentioned last week. There was a water outlet required inlet required for the water pump for the bottom hose on this, due to all of the plumbing, which I've told about before. But the revision to the oil plumbing and the water plumbing means that the majority of the water plumbing on this car, coolant plumbing, will be OE in basic design. Even if not in detail of the parts, it will be original in terms of its layout. However, the bottom hose needed revision. The bottom hose on a V12 E-Type, if you're familiar with them, is a bit of a strange configuration of a thing anyway. They're very large because they run a very large water pump and a lot of water flow because they're a big engine. But I need to reroute that water pipe due to rerouting the oil system, which we've covered before. We're now feeding the oil into the front of the block where it would be fed in on a V12 E-Type. But because of the type of the oil fitting I'm having to use, I can't use the original E-Type setup because it has to come through the middle of an ancillary belt drive that drives the aircon compressor. Because again, just recovering ground we've covered before, originally the aircon compressors on these cars were fitted right in the middle of the V, right on top, and were basically the most visible thing in the engine bay, and they're an enormous compressor and they looked horrendous and made it look like some sort of domestic appliance. So we didn't want that. And they also took up space that could have been driving an alternator, and then the alternator was hung basically off the flimsiest bracket in the world in a reversed location, pointing off the front of the engine, spinning backwards. Obviously it doesn't matter spinning it backwards, but it was basically pointing off the front of the engine, hanging in space off a floppy bracket. It was a pretty appalling setup. It was definitely not Jaguar's prime engineering. The original E-Type, very, very nice piece of Jaguar engineering. The things that were done to shoehorn a V12 and air conditioning into the front of one, definitely not really Jaguar, definitely accountant driven rather than engineer led, and we wanted to get rid of some of that, so we have, and that's necessitated various changes, one of which is the bottom hose assembly. That's now going to be a fabricated aluminium pipe, but the flange that goes on the end of that pipe is a CNC machined aluminium piece, which Andy, Concept 303, has just machined for us. I've received that. Jamie will get a bit of B-roll for that because I haven't got it in my hand, but that is then going to be the flange on the end of a fabricated pipe. We looked at other ways, 3D printing. There's a million and one ways to make a piece of pipe, but actually, because it's quite complicated, it ends up being simplest to fabricate it, to be fair. It would be very expensive to make it any other way. It'd be lovely to cast it, but I think fabrication is going to be the answer, so that's how we're going to do that. We have all the bends, we have the flange, we're going to make that very soon. So that's pretty much where we're at on E-Type. I'm going to have a little aside because I brought these through as we walked through. And a little window into the rest of the business, and one of the many, there's two things going on in fact. One is Gaz has just been changing filters over in the paint booth. Again, a thing that we would overlook quite readily, but the paint booth needs a bit of maintenance. It's hard enough to maintain clean paintwork at the best of times. We always end up with little bits of dust in paintwork that we have to nib out and polish, and keeping the filters clean is pretty key to trying to keep the atmosphere in there as clean as possible and minimise the amount of dust. So Gaz is just on the tail end of getting the booth prepped for painting. I'm going to do the body shop bit right now actually, because it just falls in at this point, to paint the Golf that we mentioned before, the rework that we were doing on the Mark II Golf. Gaz is just getting that at the point where we can do the final paint on that, so that will hopefully be done by the time we've done the polishing, will be a chunk into next week, but basically that's pretty much buttoned up now. He's got all that re-prepped, re-primed, and all ready, all masked up, and he's now literally, we've just got that before we started recording that. We've just got that into the booth, and the booth is, as I say, all cleaned up. But that's another piece of maintenance. You know, there's a few hours work in just getting the booth up to speed. But here's another bit. I did some blasting the other day, which I'll show you in a minute when we get around to the BMW. But two things happened then. I realised that our blasting helmet, which is a pretty crucial piece of PPE if you are working in a blast room, it provides your fresh air supply to breathe, it prevents you getting hit by all the blasting grit, it lets you see what you're doing with a replaceable visor, and it covers the upper half of your body, which gives the positive air-fed helmet a chance to isolate the blasting grit from getting into the helmet. The cape is damaged and really beyond repair. The lining's coming out of the helmet. It's about, the helmet's probably done about 6 years, I think now, something like that. And I looked at either just buying a complete new helmet or rebuilding the one we've got, and actually they've gone up quite a lot in price. They're about £485 now for the helmet, and I could get a new liner kit, new cape, and all the other parts to rebuild it for about just over half that. So that box there from Century Wise, I can wholeheartedly recommend them as a company to deal with. Century Wise Limited in Manchester, Stockport. They are great to deal with for if you do any blasting. I'm sure not that many of our viewers do, but if you do any blasting, when it comes to Hodge Klemco type spares, aftermarket versions, which are a little bit more economically priced, and helmets, jet washing stuff, all that sort of heavy cleaning plant, Century Wise are really good folks to deal with. That's where I get all my blast nozzles, liners, grip valve liners, blast hose, helmet spares, all that sort of stuff, all from Century Wise. And then the other problem, literally at the moment I went to stop blasting, I lost my water wall on the dust extraction. We use a water wall system for knocking the dust out of the air, for cleaning for scrubbing the extracted air, and I lost my water on that, and we run a sewage pump on that to circulate the water, a 2-inch submersible sewage pump, which is basically pumping pretty horrible sandy water most of its time. And it's done about 10 years of pumping horrible sandy water, and it started tripping the RCD. Just as I finished the job, I noticed the water flow had stopped, found it had tripped the RCD, and it's just continuously tripping the RCD. So obviously the water seal somewhere on the electrical side of the pump has broken down, the water's got in, shorting the pump out. Once we actually got it out and got it cleaned up and had a look at it, it started working again, but I can't take that chance. That literally, if that pump stops, it stops the job. So Maris Pumps Limited, I think I got that from. Very quick supply, ordered it, next day got a pump. So one of Martin's jobs when he's back, we'll be getting that pump installed in there. We've got some more fittings to go on here just to get the hose out of the water bath that sits in, because we use as a multi-stage separator on the water. Basically, we've got several tanks with settlement on, and then the pump sits in the last tank, so the grit's settled out by that point to recirculate the water through the water wall. So that needs to get put back into the system, fittings all on it, and piped back up. So Martin will be working on rebuilding the blast helmet, rebuilding the water wall extraction, and then we'll be back on with that again. But that's just one of those little things where there's actually probably 5 hours work, 6 hours work in getting that sorted out, plus ordering the parts and things, and then there's probably about an hour and a half's work in sorting the blast helmet out. So there's a little maintenance task for you, just to keep the day going. Onwards, we'll go on to the Saab, where Bobby is working on the rear of the Saab, and I'm going to kind of wander into the area. I'm going to talk about this today. Bobby's slightly off colour at the minute, and he was keen for me to do this week. So hopefully he'll be back into fully in the swing of things as soon as possible, and I can hand back over to him. But I'm going to take the reins this week and hopefully do some of his work justice. Fingers crossed. He's working in the rear area, building the side shelves, which I think we probably mentioned before. And as usual for these projects, things have got slightly complicated. So I'm sure Jamie will have some footage of these front corner sections that he's been fabricating, which are quite a complex piece. They're flanged to the body all the way around rather than being welded directly on. We had a little discussion on that and decided that whilst both systems would work, it would look a bit more original equipment and a bit more manufacturer-esque if it was all flanged. So say, when we're MIG welding it into place, which we've got to do anyway, we're going to puddle weld that in place. We could just MIG weld it in as a fillet weld, but it just looks better done as a flange and puddle welded, and it looks more like our original equipment, so we're doing it that way. So he's been making up these front corner sections. An interesting point on those, if I can lean over without battering my microphone, I'll point with Bobby's square here. There's a hole just down here, a swaged hole, which looks like it's a sort of decorative lightning hole, but it's actually for an interesting point Bobby was raising with me, which is that these seatbelt reels are actually held on. These are the Saab seatbelt reels, the original Saab ones, but mounted obviously into the Audi structure. And the mounting bolt is where I'm poking down there, and it's actually pretty much impossible to access that unless you can get something through here. So that swaged lightning hole there is actually not a lightning hole, it's actually an access hole to put a 3/8 drive socket extension down through, to get a socket down to the bolt that retains that rear seatbelt reel. So it's just a little interesting aside on the sort of detail that you need to get into when doing this sort of thing, to make sure that your things are actually serviceable further down the line. Further to that, this string in here is actually Bobby laying out the lines for these panels and working out the space required, because he's working around a speaker which is going to be fitted to the upper part of these shelves here. And that speaker requires an amount of space around it, and that amount of space dictates the shape of this shelf, which is going at the side. So it's basically going to be a shelf each side with a step that allows us a parcel shelf to drop into it. So there'll be a Z section each side of this, which allows the shelf to drop in. So he's currently fabricating those sides, but they have to have, if I hold up his cardboard template here, they have to have this S-bend in effectively. There will be a Z section off the edge, stepping down off the edge of that, but that Z section has to go through that S-bend for it to enable it to flow into the rear structure of the car, but also flow out wide enough to allow for the speakers to fit here and also to clear this rear turret assembly. So there's quite a lot of detail fabrication involved in that. So at the moment, Bobby's at the stage of doing a lot of templating, various bits of cardboard, stringing out, laser lining to find the levels, and generally laying out all of that part before he starts making the sections to graft in. At the back, this is also going to get quite complicated in that this section is going to come in and it needs to be flanged upward under the inner quarter panel here to be able to flange into that, but then it also needs to flange downward to have a finisher on the end of that shelf which flows neatly and as a compound curve into the shape of the car, so that it just looks neat when you look into the boot aperture from the back. So it's quite a detailed bit of metalwork actually, that area. It will be easier to explain when it's in front of us, and hopefully Bobby might be able to do that explanation. But yeah, as I say, it'll be easier when you can see it. But so that shelf is going to flow in neatly there. There's going to be a subwoofer in the back corner which we've got to accommodate also, and then over this lot there'll be some sound deadening and the final trim, which is likely to be a moulded section that covers all of the inner part of this shelf assembly, inside of the turret, the subwoofer enclosure and everything, all be covered by a piece of trim that goes around both sides, that also encases the battery compartment with an access door so we can get to the battery terminals and the battery shut off. It'll be an electronic battery shut off in there, but basically so we've got access to the battery area just in case anything needs doing, jump leads, whatever. So there's access into there. As I say, there'll be a subwoofer mounted this side, so it's quite a lot of detail fabrication going on in there, and that's basically what Bobby's on with. It's the section from the seat back. Now he's got the seat belts in, fabricating all of this area. The other thing, these corner panels that he's already got fabricated, they are also a key strengthener to this area. They actually tie these turret assemblies into that cross tube that you can see welded into the inner quarter reinforcers. They actually tie these in because there is a little bit of flexibility to these turrets, and they do take the spring and damper load. So it's quite key that they're reinforced as well as they can be. So we are, in fact, do they take? I'm just questioning myself now. I'm just doubting myself slightly that whether they do take the spring load. Actually, no, they don't take the spring load. They only take the damper load. But anyway, they take a significant amount of loading, and we just need to make sure that they're as reinforced and strong as possible, given the job they've got to do, which they will be once Bobby's put those corners in. So yeah, really good progress on this. Things are coming together nicely. I can see a card model, in fact, actually, of the general shape. This isn't the final piece, but as the general shape of these rear shelves, that's a card model of the general shape of that shelf to give you some idea. But again, once the fabrication work's all done on that, you'll be able to see in a lot more detail how that all sits into place. Further to that work, I imagine George is possibly going to elaborate on this, but I'll touch on it briefly. We had a visit earlier this week from Solid Print, who came over to demo. I've referred to this in previous weeks, but Solid Print from Kenilworth in the UK came to visit and demonstrate an Einscan Libra scanner, which we are at the point of basically we're going to be buying one. We haven't signed on the dotted line yet on that for various reasons, but it would seem very likely that we are going to be doing. So they brought that out to do a full day demo basically. So we've done some scanning work on the Saab and also on the Scimitar. That was kind of the update on that this week, is that we've scanned that with the body on and the body off. I'll let George elaborate on this on his bit in a bit, but basically we've done some scanning work on this and on the Scimitar. I'm very impressed. The Iron-Scan Libra is A, we're very impressed with that, and B, we're very impressed with Solid Print and their attentiveness, their commitment to not just selling the kit but supporting it properly as well, and coming out and visiting, demonstrating the kit, basically putting their money where their mouths are, and just being willing to support their equipment. So yeah, you come out, the speed that the Libra scanner can operate at is something to behold. We could achieve, albeit at a fairly low detail level, using I believe we were operating on a 2mm definition level. We scanned the entire exterior and interior of the Reliant Scimitar in somewhere in the region of 6 or 7 minutes with no markers applied, and that's pretty impressive. Now, that's not the whole picture, because we did need to enhance detail in certain areas, but that's the beauty with that Libra scanner, is you can then switch that over to a laser scan mode. Rather, it uses an infrared structured light scan or a laser scan or a combination of the two, but you can flick over to the laser mode and then go back over, do some more detailed scans in various areas, and then the software can then click those more detailed pieces using the surface profiles, can then stitch those straight in to the main scan, and it will just heighten the detail in the areas where you need it. That's all simply accomplished. The Libra is self-contained unit. It's cordless, so it just uses a rechargeable battery pack which you switch over. It's self-contained in terms of processor. It doesn't need to be connected to a laptop, so it's completely, you just walk around with a unit that's got no trailing leads, nothing attached to it. You just walk around and use it. As I say, the speed that it can do surface detail at when it's in infrared light mode is unreal. It's absolutely unreal, and its ability to pick up geometry with no markers, no surface preparation, no spray, is just unbelievable. So yes, we were very thoroughly impressed with that. We're also having to learn some new software, which again George will probably elaborate on. Watch this space on all that. We will elaborate further and talk more about that as time moves on. I'm sure George will touch on that in his bit as well. That's where we're at on Saab. BMW is going to be very brief. We'll talk briefly about this. Stu, at the tail end of last week, had been piecing together the rear panel and getting that temporarily held in place. This morning, he's just been putting some extensions on the back of the jig, as you can see down there. These sections, these towers, these extender plates, and the rear C-beam, or whatever you call it, but the rear extension beam basically onto the jig, so that you can support the rear panel, get that dead level, dead centered, everything set up right, so then he can forget about the rear panel, because he knows that's held there. That's the beauty of working on a jig. He knows that's held in the right place. Then he can start work on making the quarters actually fit that rear panel, which is obviously a big job, because that quarter's in bits, and this one's a new one that's never been on this car before, and all the cars are very slightly different. So Stu's working on that. Stu's actually not been very well. We've had a bug doing the rounds, which I think has been doing the rounds around most of the country, so a lot of our viewers will be familiar with it. There seems to be a bit of a summer cold going around, which seems to have hit Stu particularly hard this time, and he's still barking well at the moment, I'm afraid. So he's not feeling his best. But he's back in today, and as I say, he's just picking up, but literally he's just back today, so he's just picking back up where he left off on that. While he was away, I finally got round to doing a job I've been promising to do, which was blasting the door inners, which leads neatly back to when I was talking about the maintenance work on the blast room. That's when all that came about, because I did the blasting on those on Tuesday, I think. On Tuesday afternoon, I think I did those. So these door inners here, I'll move that wing out of the way, these were pretty grotty. Stu had done the repairs on them, but they had various bits of wax oil, quite a lot of rust, original paint, general mess in quite a few areas. So we whip these door frames off. These are new sections at the top and at the bottom. The rest was used slightly poorly door. So whip those off, got them in the blast room, and blasted them all round, inside out, everywhere. And then on yesterday morning, Gaz got them epoxy primed in the anti-corrosion 2-part epoxy primer. We've got a couple of bits that have come up from blasting, a couple of bits that are a bit thin and blew through, so that's a typical result of what happens when the metal's getting a little bit thin and you blast it to clean it up. You might make some little holes like that. That's one of the benefits of blasting over a process like acid dipping. That hole wouldn't be there if that had been acid dipped. That would just be microscopically thin, Rizzler paper thin metal, whereas when you blast it, it just pokes a hole in it. So Stu now knows that he's got to repair that little bit, which again, if that was just acid dipped, that would look fine until he came to weld it, or until it got to about 6 months after you'd painted it, and it would then rot through. So that's the result of blasting. So yeah, these are now looking nice, clean, tidy, ready to be skinned, which I wanted to get to that stage of having these doors ready for Stu, so that he, when the time is right, can get the skins onto these, and then he's got something to line the quarters up with. That's the juggling act, is getting the doors in the car in the right place, and then the quarters can be lined up with the door, and the wings can be lined up with the door. We've got an alignment point. So that's where we're at on BMW. I shall dwell no further on that. We'll whiz around here, right past Stu, and on to Aston Martin. Actually, I'm going to dwell in this area on the Aston. We had a visit from our customer with the Aston Martin on Tuesday, and that was a really good visit. It was really nice to see him again and his wife. It was really good to meet them again. Really nice guy to deal with, and he had a good look around the Aston. I think he was pretty happy with everything. He seemed very pleased. Everything's heading along the right track. Got a couple of tweaks. We wanted to do a seating trial, which we did, which was good. So we have a steering wheel position now, so we know from the steering wheel position and the steering column that we're using, which is a Jaguar X300 steering column. Using those two bits of information, we now know where the steering column is going to be mounted. From that, Luke will be able to design the steering column mountings as part of the bulkhead assembly. We also did a seating position trial from a point of view of pedal positions. We now know where the pedal unpressed positions need to be for the pedals. So again, from that, and knowing that we are using a Series 3 Jaguar XJ type pedal assembly, we can then know where the positioning of the mounting face for that pedal assembly needs to be. Again, that's another bit of data that Luke can float in CAD, so he can make his little pedal mounting pad, his steering column mounting brackets, draw them up, floating in space, and then that gives him some hard points to put the bulkhead through. And also we did some little fiddling around with the seating positions. We're actually we're actually threading the needle, I would use as a description for the seating position, in that we've got the seat about as low as we can get it. We can't really lower the floor pans anymore because they'll become a ground clearance issue, but the head clearance is still tight, and I think that's just a thing with an Aston DBS, is that the roof's bloody low. The car's very, very wide, but the roof's low. So head clearance is tight. Now, fortunately, our customer of this car is not excessively tall, so he does actually fit okay. But there isn't an abundance of headroom. My brother, Callum, he's got a very tall upper body, so it's actually quite tight for him. He does fit, but it will be pretty tight on the headlining for his head. That said, that's not an unfamiliar experience for him, because he does struggle for head clearance in a lot of cars. But we've got that to an acceptable position now. Further to that, obviously Matt has been working on this. He's also had the lurgy this week, but he's back as well. He's working on getting these side sections finished, which I think you probably saw the beginnings of last week. So he's got these templated, cut out the blanks, put the beads into them, reinforcing beads into them, and got them grafted in and all stitch welded into the back of the car. To finish these to the quarter, there'll be an edge section, a piece of steel or aluminium, possibly aluminium I think, which will screw on around there, a strip that will screw on that will have a rubber edge trim fitted to it that will then blank the gap off to the actual outer body. It may have a rubber edge trim, or it may have a flange which we then seal with a rubber sealing type compound, possibly a not fully curing, permanently flexible rubber compound, or possibly with a PU compound. I'm not sure yet. Basically, that's going to be sealed to the outer body around there, as that'll be the point where the outside and the inside meet. Now, the body does come round there, so this will be won't be suffering the full effects of road spray from the wheel, but it will be the point where the inside of the boot is separated from the outside of the car. So that is a key sealing point around there, and that's why we bring this panel up short, so that we can make an edge section round there, which then accurately fills that gap, rather than trying to make this fit the body, because fitting the body over this is quite challenging. There'll be exactly the same around the wheel arch. There'll be a filler strip which screws into the wheel arch, which fills the gap out to the body, and again that'll be sealed against the body and tidy that area up nicely. Matt's also finished the fabrication work on this rear cross member, got all that in. He's sculpted the ends of the rear cross member to fit within the body, and he's had the rear body on and off a number of times to check the clearance of everything on that. He's also got the spare wheel, because he's starting to work on the boot floor now, and the cutout for the fuel tank. He's working on we've got to modify this section. It was kind of put in with the knowledge that it would be changed. It was just a basic shape to start with, because that shape is carrying on across there. The centre section of that will be cut out to allow room for the drop section of the fuel tank to slide in. And then there'll be a pocket put into that for the spare wheel. In the centre of the boot floor there'll be a beaded recess, or a jennied recess for the spare wheel to just sit into. It won't have any great depth to it, but it'll add some reinforcement strength to the boot floor for where the spare wheel goes. Discussion with the customer concluded that the spare wheel wasn't super critical. He wasn't that bothered, but we concluded that we can use one of the Jaguar 19-inch alloy space savers that we've used before. The Churchill project has one. In fact, it's actually sitting in the passenger seat of the car at the moment. So we'll use one of those on this. That should clear the brakes. We need to verify that, but it should clear the brakes. It's for a suitable diameter to clear everything, and it doesn't take up much space. So what we're going to do is give the option that the space saver can be mounted in the boot and be had for journeys where you might want a spare wheel, but then if you don't want a spare wheel, you can take it out and gain a little bit more boot space. Although the boot space is pretty adequate anyway, as we said, there is quite a lot. But we are changing the shape of the back of the car. Originally these had a heavily dropped section in the centre, which I believe was to allow a full-size spare wheel to be fitted. I can't actually remember whether that's what was in this car. I think it may have been missing. But anyway, there was a heavily dropped section in the centre of the boot originally, which necessitates a very ugly looking, pretty horrible rear valance, which was one of the things that really let the look of these cars down, was that rear valance. They were very badly resolved at the back. The side view, the quarter panel and the side view of this section of the car, we've kind of all concluded is basically perfect and doesn't really need fiddling with. They're a very nice looking car from most angles. The failing of them is the rear angle, which they just aren't properly resolved down here. So we're changing all that, and we are properly resolving that, but not dropping the boot floor down in the middle is a key to that. So we're going to run the boot floor straight off the bottom of these rear chassis rails all the way across. So it'll be a very wide, relatively shallow, but very, very wide boot area. And then we're going to run a big transverse silencer underneath that. So we'll run two pipes into that transverse silencer, cross them over as two separate long lengths of perforated tube within that, and then come back out of the opposite ends. So you'll have effectively the right-hand bank of the engine will be exhausting on the left-hand side at the back of the car, and vice versa. And that will give us a nice, large, long length of perforated tube within the silencer for each bank to get a decent quantity of silencing done in a relatively compact area without impinging on the rear view of the car, because again the original car ran longitudinal silencers heavily inclined like that up each side, and the back part of those silencers was very visible at the back, and then the underside of those silencers was very close to the ground and very visible because it was so low where it came under the axle assembly, under the original Didion axle assembly that was on these. So all of that's going. Our pipes will come out under either side of the diff fairly near the centre and loop through a transverse box and then out at the back. So you have a tailpipe visible each side and a slightly upswept tailpipe visible each side, but not a great chunking great silencer hanging in free space there looking ugly, and no big box in the valance in the middle. The valance will just be a much cleaner straight across sort of a design that just looks nice and tidy. So I think, at risk of waffling on, that's pretty much where we're at on the Aston. we've already mentioned the scimitar from a scanning point of view, which was what was achieved on that this week. I've already mentioned body shop because we've already covered the Golf being in the paint booth. Gaz has been working on a number of other things, and he's actually pulling in various paintwork for the Den as well, I should say here. He's pulling in various tasks that are being undertaken at the Den. We're obviously covering the paintwork for those as well. So yeah, there's a fine mix of work going on there. And I think at that point, I've probably covered everything that needs to be covered in here. I'm sure I'll have missed something, but I think that's covered everything enough. And at that point, I think I'm going to hand over to Cal. So see you in a week's time. And actually, in a week's time, I won't be handing over to Cal because he's on holiday in a week's time. He'll be away. So, but I will see you next week.
Thank you very much, Nat. And I'm starting here because I'm standing in front of something shiny, and like all car guys, when there's shiny stuff around, like a magpie, we're drawn in towards it. And this is a quad cam Jaguar V12. It's essentially a reproduction of an engine that they built for the XJ13. I think they made 5 engines, if I'm right in saying that. And then there is a company in the UK that has done basically a reproduction head casting to be able to produce their own version of it, which is a pretty spectacular looking engine. How it is performance wise, I have no idea. That remains to be seen. However, this is the first ingredient in another project which will be forthcoming, and you'll find out in due course. Morris, so we're really just ticking off some last little bits on this. I was a bit worried about the wheel clearance on these wing deflectors, and it was impossible to tell, even from test driving it, whether they cleared in all situations. So we've just taken the coilover off this corner so we could get it all the way through its travel, try all different steering lock angles and check, and it was just touching at the very top of the spat when you were at full bump basically, but with steering straight ahead. So we're just doing a quick tweak to that, and then we're going to print the final ones of those so we can get those on. Other than that though, this is looking pretty good. I've reprinted the owner's manual. One thing the owner pointed out to me was there was loads of great information. Awesome that it's got a manual. A lot of these kind of builds don't have a user manual with them, and we do that, a proper nicely published one. But I'd forgotten to point out the obvious of how to remove the wheels, and they had like a cap on with a spun on centre cap and then a grub screw in the side of it, and it wasn't immediately obvious that the grub screw was there if it wasn't pointing upwards. So I've put that information in the user manual. Other than that, this is looking pretty cool. And actually I've got a couple of interesting things relating to this. We mentioned last week it was in, or Fast Car magazine did a little video which is for their YouTube channel. This month it's in Copacetic magazine, or Copacetic magazine, which I'll put a link to down below, which I think is in the shops imminently. If it's not available right away, it will be shortly, but it's a very cool magazine, and I would suggest subscribing to that, because not many people have got the bravery at the minute to go out there and actually do a new published magazine. And from what I've seen in the first 2 issues, it's really good bit of reading, really nicely laid out, and probably most importantly, the choice of feature cars is absolutely on point, so you can find that there. And also, I think we probably will see this in September sometime, but we're going to have a little slot car of this. I'm not allowed to use the word Scalextric, but I'm going to use it anyway. But it's not actually a Scalextric brand one, it's another company that have made it, but we'll go into that in more detail when we show you that in September. So that's that. Project Portofino, a lot of the work has just been everything coming back from its refurbishing processes. So at the minute, we're doing a lot of unmasking. Actually on the table over here, there's some parts, I don't know if we'll be able to get them in shot, but stripping the wishbone, masking off. So whenever we send parts off for powder coat, to avoid powder coat build up in places where you don't want it, so like in these bores here where bushes fit, for example, you need to put something in there that's robust enough to resist blasting and robust enough to resist the heat of the oven when they bake the powder coat, but not completely impossible to remove. So for instance on these we use bits of silicone hose quite often because that's heat resistance enough, and the blasting process that just bounces off it. There are a variety of silicone bungs and that sort of thing, but so for instance I think we've probably got some here. There you go, you can buy these silicon kind of tapered bungs that go into round holes. So we mask everything up like that, and then they go away, be blasted, zinc metal sprayed, which is the same process we do on the body shells, but this is done by a local company called BG Penny, who do our blasting, zinc metal spraying and powder coating of components. And then the powder coat goes on, and as we've explained before with zinc metal spraying, the beauty of that is that if the powder coat gets damaged, or if the paint or whatever coating is over the zinc metal spray gets damaged, it still actively protects it because of the nature of zinc and the way it works electrolytically to protect steel. So yeah, basically stripping down lots of powder coated parts ready for them to go onto the car, assembling together all the batches of parts. We've had the window motors, don't know if I mentioned that last week, we've had the window motors completely rebuilt, literally disassembled completely, refurbished, new bearings, rewound and rebuilt, because they are under some punishment in these because it's a heavy old window, which is why they do those weird tape measure type lift assisters on them just to lift the weight of the glass, because the glass is pretty thick. But that is one of my things I love about these, is the pillarless nature of them, and when you put the front and rear glass down when it's a finished car and the whole side is just open, which is just the coolest thing. So yeah, can't wait to see everything start to come together from that. For that, the gearbox is being rebuilt at the moment as well, and I think we're just about to pick back up on the engine build. Adam should be doing that. Camaro, I speculated last week that I would be saying again that we'll be testing it next week. This week, and I am, because we came across a problem. We did get to the point of running it up. I finished off the last bits of PDM programming, so there was some programming to do on the lights, which I hadn't done already. The warning lights on the dash all needed programming because we've got separate outputs for those. Sorting out the indicator programming, main beam, dip beam, etc. Tested everything electrically. Now everything's working, warning lights are working, instruments are all working. That's allowed us to get everything back in the car now, interior wise, so it's pretty much just the last details in there and a good old clean out inside, and it is 100% done. But when we ran it up, I think it's the first time we've run it fully up to temperature, because I wanted to check the fan operation, make sure that was kicking in and out as it should. And there was a fairly substantial leak on the radiator. And I'm going to hold my hands up on this and say it was our fault, but I can completely understand why we made the mistake. So we had this radiator fabricated by Concept Racing, who make a lot of our radiators, but we were very nervous about the neck positions because they've got to be so accurate to get them in the center of those holes. We didn't even think making a mock-up radiator in steel was going to be accurate enough, because there's still it's difficult to, when there's a slight angle on it, it's difficult to measure that when it's multiple angles. So we decided to get them to fabricate a radiator without that neck attached, and we would weld it on afterwards, which we did. What I didn't realise, or nobody realised, was that the way they'd made the radiator, it had completely built up end tanks which would put onto the core at each side, and then the top plate of the radiator, which more commonly would just be welded along the inner edge of the end tank above the core, had been fully overlapped over the end tanks and welded all the way around. But because it was welded very neatly on top of the first weld, it wasn't very obvious that that had been done. So it was double skinned on the top of both the tanks, and of course our fabricator, I don't know who it was at the time, had drilled a hole through, put the neck on, got it all lined up and welded around it, not realising it was double skinned. And so it was leaking out between the two skins. So it wasn't a big problem to fix. We dropped it out, cut a slot in that top plate and welded it up so it's a completely sealed area. But yes, one of those random trip-ups that you would never see coming in a million years, and I can't really blame anyone for it, because I'm sure I would have made the same mistake as well. And I'm completely useless at welding, so it would be rude of me to criticise a fabricator. All right, so yeah, basically that's now fixed. So this is ready to take out on the road. So I think, although I haven't mentioned this next week that I'm away, I would guess Adam's going to be out in this next week, at least tootling around. Normally what I find with first test drives is the first one gets as far as the gateway before I discover there's something that we need to tweak. Second one gets as far as just down the end of the road, which is about half a mile down the road, before we discover something that needs tweaking. And then you actually have a period of being able to put a lot of miles on, and there'll be little niggles and things to tick off, but we'll see how it goes on this. But very exciting. Let's squeeze through this way. Interceptor. I'm trying to think what it was Interceptor wise now. Jamie, you're going to have to help me here. I've forgotten what I was going to talk about on this. Maybe there was nothing.
Wasn't anything, mate.
No. And there wasn't. I think largely we're waiting for. No, there is something. We're largely waiting for outside processes. So we're having the transmission rebuilt at the minute, which is the first stumbling block before getting the engine and transmission back in the car. All the chrome's away at the minute. So once that's back, that opens up a huge number of jobs. The thing I was going to mention, I'm actually wondering whether I said last week, which was the coilovers. We're sending those away. I don't know if I did mention that. So this has got front and rear subframes from a company in the US called Heights, although there's been some modifications made to them in this instance, and the coilovers on it were ones that would have come with that kit. Now, we noticed one of the adjusters had seized up, and we'd also noticed they're not gas pressurised, because you can just push the push rod in. They're just oil dampers, which doesn't suggest, both of those things together don't suggest they're the highest quality. I mean, they're unbranded. I don't know who has actually made them, but on a build of this calibre, we were thinking, well, I don't really want to use slightly dubious, questionable coilovers on it. So we've taken one front and one rear off, and they're going to be sent out to Nitron to essentially do their own version to the same dimensions. So we've got a known quality unit, because it would feel like spoiling the ship for a half penny of tar, or whatever the old saying is, to just put those dampers on because they were with it when we got it. So that's where we're at with that. Allegro, James has almost finished the interior now. He's got the dash components that he'd upholstered last week in. He's got the bits around the steering column shroud in. Carpets are kind of laid in there. They need the rest of the gluing work done. He's making a few tweaks to the rear seat, and then I think once he's got that back in, he's going to finish all the carpets, get the front seats in, and that's done in terms of the interior then. And then Churchill, again, James, he's been starting on the seats. So he's now cut the boards which will provide the base for the rear seat, the back for the rear seat, the parcel shelf. Then Luke's been helping out on interior related stuff as well. So we've now machined on the CNC router in the background there 2 wooden rails that sit inside the roof, which are what James wanted to assist him with hanging the quilted leather headlining we're doing for this. And then Luke's also been machining the foam that we'll use for that. So you'll have seen this before if you're a long-term follower, but we've basically come up with a technique for machining a diamond pattern into upholstery foam, so that we can stitch down the resultant grooves in it, and it produces a diamond sort of quilting pattern that's extremely deep. It really has a lot of three-dimensionality to it. It looks fantastic in the right setting. You know, diamond quilting, not everyone's cup of tea. I know it's quite an old thing, but I think it absolutely has its place in the right car, and this is the right car. You know, it's totally got that look about it, that kind of gentleman's club, but in a good way. Cigar smoking, whiskey drinking. You know, it's going to be an amazing thing. What I don't like is like the transporter interiors you see, where it's just a flat piece of vinyl or leather with like diamonds stitched, usually in a garish colour over the top of an equally garish colour, and it doesn't really bring a lot to the party. But yeah, I can't wait to see that. So that is that. And I touched on it a minute ago. I think that this is a short week, so I'm filming this on Wednesday because I'm going away tomorrow, and I'm going away for 2 weeks, and it's the first 2-week holiday I've had in 15 years actually, because that's basically how long we've been running this company. So everyone else is going to be holding the fort while I'm gone, and Nat will have to do the video for the next 2 weeks on his own, which I'm sure he's more than capable of doing. But that's one of the reasons it seems a bit light on things going on here, is that really it's only been Monday and Tuesday's progress at this point, so it's a little bit of a short week. But anyway, on that note, I'm going to hand over to the CAD den to see what's going on up there.
Hi guys, welcome back to the CAD temple, and I am back from my many travels, and what a great time. As I said in the reel, I think one of the coolest things about being out there was the fact that everybody out there modifies their car. 90% of it is terrible, but the fact that everyone does is still quite a nice thing to see, because, you know, it's a bit of fun nonetheless. But anyway, back to work. This week has actually been a really exciting week. I'm going to start off with something which was super fun, which was my first bit of CNC machining, if you can even call it that. Some really simple stuff, but nonetheless some really fun stuff to kind of start off with. The first thing was, both things are for Churchill. The first thing was the headlining rails. So they run horizontally across the roof, and they give James a part to be able to staple in the headliner to. And then the second part was actually the diamond foam sheet, which kind of makes up the headliner itself. They both went really smoothly. First time done and dusted, and we managed to cut down the time of the diamond foam cutting by quite a dramatic amount as well. Still improvements to be made and still a lot to learn in terms of machining itself, but I am so excited to get really stuck in on that. Separately to that, I came back into the office on Monday and there was about 30,000 individual 3D prints waiting for me. So a large part of this week has been cleaning and bonding 3D prints, which I'm not going to lie to you, the cleaning part is absolute misery and my fingers really hurt. But it's done now, it's all bonded. Here's one I made earlier. This is a lower section of the Churchill door card, which has been finally bonded this morning. And then I've got a bit more cleaning to do on the rear, where when you 3D print, you have support material, and in efforts to try avoid warping, we played around with some of the settings, which did work in terms of warping. It helped a lot, but has also provided ridiculously difficult support material to get off. So I've got a bit more cleaning to do on the rear of it, but the front's looking really good. I'm gonna trial that on the door card itself and then hand that over to James very, very soon. And then the other thing that I've been on with, same sort of 3D print cleaning and bonding process, is a lot of the Quattro stuff. So I don't know if it was mentioned in last week's video, but we had the Audi front grille pieces come back through. Here is the rear infill section here, cool little Retropower logo on the top there, and a few other of the grills here. And so the most of them were completely fine, they're on the car already, and then this is the only one that needed a slight edit because I forgot to add in allowance, well, not forgot, I had the bumper, I didn't have the car at the time, and I didn't realise there was a towing eye behind there, so I've just done some edits to this to allow for the towing eye through that gap, and then kind of filleted out the corners so it looks still OEM, and yeah, really happy with that, so I can take that over to the den. And then last but not, actually not last but not least at all, but one other thing on the Quattro is, before I went on holiday, you would have seen me working on the shifter arrangement in the Quattro for the new gearbox and everything. This is a ceiling piece, the other ones are on the shelf over there, and it stops elements from getting inside of the car because no one wants that, it's not convertible. And now I need to take that over to the den and trial that on the car, and I believe that is everything for the Quattro. So I'm just going to very quickly touch on the Morris, which is downstairs now. That's kindly been put in the air for me, and I was able to bond on the rear light covers. So like cover, it covers the cover of the rear lights. The rear lights sit in the back of the wheel arch. The owner was a bit concerned about mud and stones and everything flipping up and hitting them. So I've done some carbon printed covers which are bonded onto the rear, and they've got Allen keys so you can remove the front panel of it. And yeah, they are drying onto the car now. So I'm going to hand over to George, who's currently stacking many 3D prints. Thanks, guys.
Tower of printing.
Yeah, honestly.
I got it balancing earlier. Okay, hello. Thank you, Luke. So this week in the CAD Cave of Misery, I've been doing a smattering of different things. Nat's brought up a little bit what we was doing at the start of the week, which was scanning with the new scanner. I won't go into the details of that because I believe Nat's talked about it, but yeah, safe to say we're quite impressed. It's got effectively a few modes, and if you scan on the quick mode, we did an entire car in about, well, within 5-10 minutes, which is insane because normally it takes us a day with our current scanner. So yeah, hopefully we'll be going down that road, but effectively this week I've been doing a load of different jobs, but also learning the new software because the new scanner has a new software. Which is what this is. Which actually, to be fair, I'm going to loop back around and talk about this. I'm not just standing here weirdly with this in my hand. This is the airbox housing for the E-Type. which I've talked about many times and I'm not going to go into detail, but we finally got some of it printed and so we can get it tested. I may have exploded it slightly because I put too much neoprene gasket in here, but long story short, if we undo these little duggers, it's a two-piece. Oh no, I've broken it already. Right, we're not taking it apart, viewers, because I've broken it, but there's an air filter inside of here, which I'll get Jimmy to get some footage of later. But this holds the air filter for the car. This O-ring here will clamp down to the bonnet, so when the bonnet shuts, it will shut an O-ring on or a neoprene gasket onto this, which then feeds this with cold air, filters in here, and then inside this hole will be another pipe. Jamie's really struggling to get footage here. I'm making it difficult for him this week. Yeah, a neoprene pipe will come out of here, not a neoprene pipe, just a pipe will come out here onto the throttle body, and that allows this to move independently to the engine, but also have filtered air, which is a challenge we've been fighting for a couple of weeks, as you know, and we're getting there. And also what I want to show is my favourite bit of the entire design, which is the bracket for it, which no one's ever going to see, which is why I want to show it now, which is like a nice organic shape, and I think it's quite cool. But yeah, no one's ever going to see this because this goes on the bottom like so, and then this goes in the car. That then bolts down, and we've got two bolts which Scott's going to put some bosses on the car. Also been doing effectively been printing the entire intake system for the E-Type, which we're getting there, but there's only so many printers and we've got to do a lot of juggling to make sure everyone's happy. Going back to the scanner, because I've done a bit of a roundabout. I've been learning the software, which is called EX Model, which is very similar to the Peel software, which we're kind of used to, and you guys have seen them many times. But there's a couple of different ways of how it works, and everything's just slightly different. So I've been like relearning it, and this is a total of less than an hour's worth of scanning, which is kind of mad. Which is the entire Saab in its current form with the engine and all the kind of modifications Bobby's done. So now I'm in the process of learning the software and also trying to clean this so we can then import it into Fusion and start the bodywork modifications to allow Bobby to do the provisions needed, so we can then get the parts made from carbon and that whole process, which I'm not going to go into detail now. So yeah, that's kind of mainly what I've been on with. I'm going to now hand to Cal. Yes, because Cal's actually not here currently. He's on holiday. Hand back to Cal. But yeah, thank you for listening to my ranting and rambling, and I will see you in a different week, I guess. Words? Yes.
Thank you very much, guys. I'm going to now hand over to the den to see what's going on down there, but because I'm away, I will see you in a couple of weeks' time. Enjoy that over the next couple of weeks, and I'm going to enjoy seeing the progress that's happened while I'm away. Catch you then.
Hello, welcome back to the den. Thank you very much, Cal. Here we are again. So this week we have completed the inspection on the 633 CSI that's come from UAE, now registered in the UK. Absolutely solid, as you might imagine, having been in a hot climate. Body is absolutely perfect. There's a couple of areas where there's just a little bit of surface orange starting to show, so I'm recommending to the customer that we're going to address those. And there's some fairly chonky wiring going on around the headlights mostly, which an early guess is it's to do with the headlights being converted probably from a right traffic to left traffic. Not 100% sure. Anyway, it's slightly chonky, so we're going to have a look at that. And there's a little bit of chonky stuff going on with some switch gear. Mechanically, it's really good. I mean, there's nothing wrong with it at all. What really shows its age, or makes it feel its age, is the 3-speed box, which is quite clunky and slow. But it sounds lovely, and it still goes well. So I'm having a chat with the customer about this later on, and we'll be able to get underway with some work on that, which is cool. We're going to go straight inside, and we're going to go past the Merc because we're still waiting on CAD Luke to do some stuff, because he's been swanning around the world doing fancy stuff while everyone else is working. Chris has his own job in the detailing bay. It's very cool 944, which not long been painted, so he's going over that, just bringing the paint up. Looks really cool. Luke over here is on with the Porsche, so there's a couple of extra bits we're just doing on the Porsche. We had a bit of a tough time at the MOT in respect to emissions on this, so Luke's just going through a few bits, just some standard procedure stuff to work through on this, to go back and have a check and a retest on that. Otherwise, yeah, the Porsche is basically done. And like I said last week, I'm a big fan of that, really big fan of that still. So the Lexus, not a lot of visual progress per se, other than Owen's been under here for a day or two, basically cleaning everything. So we've got some really good kind of intensive tire cleaner, and we can go underneath the body. We've done all that ourselves this time around, to get all the underside of the car prepped. We've got more parts coming in. Still got an order open at Lexus for some bits, so I'm hoping that next week we'll have some more bits and we'll have some stuff going back together, which will be very cool on that. Over here, we've got the Subaru. Now, I can't remember if we saw this before or not. So Subaru Forester 2015. In fact, we did talk about this, I remember, because the customer loves it and he wants to put a bit of money into it to keep it going, improve it a little bit, and put some more life in for kind of another 10-15 years. So when it came to us last time, it was just developing a funny kind of creaking sound, which we didn't fix back then because of time constraints and so on, but we basically put a new drive shaft on to fix that, so that's all quite straightforward. We've then, as you can see, we've got some of the front of the car off, which is over at Retropower now for paint. So the car had a little a shallow bump on the front, so it had cracked and broken the bumper, so we're actually putting a new bumper on, and the wing was dented, headlight surround was all broken, so the customer supplied a new one of those for us. The wing is being repaired and painted. The bonnet's going to get dent repaired and then painted in due course. And our dent man Paul from Dent Techniques coming in next week, and he's going to go over the whole car, do all the further dent repairs. Just, there's nothing really bad per se, it's just a lot of wear and tear really, it's just careworn. So we're doing that, and then the customer is also, he wants to delete all the chrome accents. So as Jamie told me, a 2009 expression will be saying murdered out. So we are murdering out this car. It's going drug dealer spec, but we don't deal drugs, don't do drugs, kids. So all the chrome's going to get painted black, body colour, and then the wheels, we're getting the wheels refurbished, and then we're going to go, instead of black and the diamond cut sort of polish finish, we're going to go to like a bronze accent on the wheels as well. So it's going to look really smart. And then the next time around, so we're doing that at the moment. We've only got the car for a short period of time because the customer's going on holiday. So when it comes back, we're going to look at upgrading the audio and probably put some sound deadening in as well, because it's being Japanese, it's just a little bit tinny. So it will just help keep it a little bit quieter for him. That is it from me at the moment. I'm going to hand upstairs to James, and I'm away for a couple of weeks, so I shall be leaving you in the capable hands of Luke, so help me God, for a couple of weeks for the video. But in the meantime, here's James.
Alright guys, so yeah, been doing some trimming, Ellie's been doing some stitching and stuff. Cal said I needed to do some leathering, so I'm getting leathered. I'm just going to cut some stuff with... Got your scissors, Joe!
Right, welcome back to the trim shop. Yeah, some people say I'm a bit monotone, but yeah, not that monotone. Yeah, this week we have not been drinking beer.
Speak for yourself.
Yeah, so if the bosses have seen that, that wasn't me drinking that was Luke. So all complaints to Luke. Yeah, so this week we have been on the Allegros. So Ellie was here, so I took advantage, and we got the foot plates bound, so I'm just both finishing them off. The rear seat was a bit creased where they've been working on it and moving it around, so I've just brought that back, tightened it up a little bit, so we're dead happy with that. Ellie was cracking on with the steering wheel for the 500 SEC. She wasn't quite happy, so she's just redone a few bits on that. Quattro, we have the 3D printed parts, so today I'll be smoothing them off and trying them in the car, ready to finish off the headlining on that. Churchill, so
This will be the parcel shelf, so I've patterned that, cut that out. I think we're going to do quilting inside there, so that should look really nice. So I'm going to have to keep taking that back a few times and just trying the window rubber in, see how this bit fits around there, because it's a bit tight, so we'll look at that. And then rear seats just in front of you here, so I've patterned them, cut them out, and now I'm going to be on the foam, so I've ordered the foam. I think we're going to do it in inch layers and build it up because it's quite tight with headroom in the back, so we're going to keep trying it out. I'm going to cut 3 layers of inch foam and then see what the thickness is like and where I see it and gauge it from there really. So yeah, hopefully next week you should see the foam work done on that, and then we can crack on covering it. Luke has cut the headlining battens and the foam now in the CAD, so I can crack on with the headlining. So Ellie will be fuming at me next week because she'll have to do the diamonds on that. And yeah, all good. So crack on finishing this, sand them, and yeah, I'll see you next week.
Thank you very much, James. That's all from us this week here at the Den and Retropower. Stay tuned next week. Have yourselves a lovely time. We'll see you then.